Hey, it's Larry Lursey. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the rule of thirds, how it applies in art, and then how we would apply that in photography. So, if that's something you'd like to learn more about, you're in the right place. And if you're ready to go, let's roll the intro. Okay, so let's talk about the rule of thirds. Basically, what it means is you are dividing your image into thirds, both vertically and horizontally, and then you try to get your subject to be placed right in one of those lines, and hopefully you would have their face, in this example, right there where those lines intersect in what is generally referred to as a PowerPoint. And that is basically the concept of using rule of thirds. It's very simple, but it's important to remember that it's not an end-all be-all rule. There are times that it works wonderfully, and there are times that it doesn't necessarily work. So you can't always use it, but you'll find that a lot of times it is a great starting point. Now, when you're talking about compositional theory, there's all kinds of things with dynamic symmetry, for example, and a golden ratio, even bullseye composition. There's several different ways you can go about it. Now, it's kind of a common misconception that the rule of thirds has been around a long time, back to the old Greek paintings or Renaissance, things like that. And the term rule of thirds didn't actually come up until the late 1700s. It was actually coined by a painter named John Smith. Go figure, John Smith, not a made-up name. John Smith used it to describe this phenomenon of using those third divisions to lay out your composition. And that's kind of where the term came from. So you could go back and find lots of examples in older art where things have fallen on those thirds, but the term didn't actually come about till the late 1700s. Here's an example from a painting by William Turner from 1838, and you'll notice that the boat is placed right down there. We've got the lines showing the vertical and horizontal thirds and where they intersect, and you've got the boat right there where the two lines intersect. And that is putting it in a PowerPoint, and the theory, at least, is that that gives you a stronger sense of composition. Here's a photographic example, an image by Cartier-Bresson of this very unique angle. We're looking down this staircase at this bike going through, and you talk about the decisive moment and capturing just the right time, which Cartier-Bresson was so famous for. And you'll notice that that bike is right there. If we overlay our rule of thirds onto this, that bike is right there in that intersection of lines. And it creates this wonderful image where your eye follows the staircase around and you land right there on the bike. Has tons of impact, fantastic photograph. And that's kind of what we're talking about with rule of thirds. Now you can go back through art history and look at paintings all the way back, as far back as you want to go, and you'll find times that this happens. You'll find times that they're using other compositional theories, or sometimes it just looks haphazard, like they've put the painting together and you can't tell why things are where they are. And so you can't always go by that rule. Sometimes it's just a matter of you're looking through your camera and you decide, I think it looks better here, I think it looks better here. But it does seem that a lot of times having that horizon line right in the center of the image kind of creates kind of a stagnant feel to the image, and you will oftentimes get a little more impact by moving it around. Let's jump into Photoshop real quick and let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here is a typical travel type image that you would work with as an example on rule of thirds. Now we've got the water at the bottom, sky at the top, the horizon lines more or less going through the middle of the image. And so what we want to look at is how this would fit with rule of thirds. So if we just drop this overlay on top, basically here's your rule of thirds. We've divided it into thirds vertically, thirds horizontally, and where these meet are what are generally referred to as the PowerPoint. So you'd like your horizon line to be on one of these two lines, or thereabouts, if you're trying to follow this rule of thirds. So, keeping that in mind, let's look at cropping this a couple of different ways and see what kind of results we get. So, what I'm going to do here is, before I crop an image, I'm always going to kind of look at two different things. One is, do I want it to be a standard size crop? Do I want it to be a square or an 8x10 type crop? an image like this, I feel like you would benefit from having a longer, more panoramic type of crop on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the crop tool, and you can see I've got mine set to 10 inches by 5 inches. So it's going to be much more of a longer type print. Once we put in 5 by 10, one of the things you'll notice up here is this little grid, and if we hit the little triangle, you've got these different compositional options that you can use. You've got golden spiral here. We can switch to golden ratio. We're going to switch to rule of thirds. And so basically the cropping tool is already giving us rule of thirds, and we can move up or down like that, and it's still going to keep these thirds. So I'm going to hit escape real quick and turn off this so we can look at the image again. Now, but the other thing we want to look at before we crop it is, now that we know that we're going this way, we've got to decide if we want the horizon line to be at the lower third or the upper third. And I will generally base that on which is more interesting. In this scene, do we feel like the sky half is more interesting or the ocean half is more interesting? And then you're going to kind of crop it accordingly. Now, in my opinion, for this image, I kind of like the bottom half as being more interesting, mostly because this big area of clouds here just isn't that interesting. And we could go back in and either put in a different sky or play with some things like that. But based on how it is, I find this part to be more interesting than the top part. So I'm going to try and have more of this showing and more of this cropped, if that makes sense. So now let's go back to our crop tool. Once we click in the middle, it's going to bring this up, and we can kind of drag up and down. So we can look at it with this being the actual horizon line in the image. We can bring that horizon line down to the bottom third, and that's going to, you can see that's going to give us a lot of sky, which I think this kind of really amplifies that fact of some of the sky here is not as interesting. Love these two pieces of sky, I like this piece of sky, but if I'm looking at these squares here, I feel like this one is definitely not very interesting, and this one is mildly interesting. So I would tend to look at the other option, which would be putting the horizon line up here. Now that might require us to come in a little bit on the bottom like that, but actually what I'd probably do is go ahead and crop it like this and then stretch out the bottom. So let's try doing all three, and then we will compare them and decide which one we like. So first one, we're going to just keep it dead center like this, and we will hit return, and then I'm just going to save this and call it center. Okay, then we'll go back to the uncropped. Let's do it again. This time we will put the horizon line at the bottom third like that. That's good. We will call this more sky. And then finally, I'm going to move it up, put the horizon line up there near the top. Okay, so now we've got this little bit of black at the bottom, which can be problematic. So what we're going to do is basically just stretch this bottom part out real quick. We can't have it as background. We've got to double click on that. Now what we will do is get the marquee tool, go ahead, select this, do Command T, hold down Shift, and drag that down. Similar to a technique we did on an extending backgrounds video I did a little while back. I'll put a link to that if you'd like to watch that if you don't know what I just did there. But stretch that out, hit return, and that gives us the more ocean version. Great, so now let's look at all three of them together. So up here we've got the center horizon line. Here we've got the lower, here we've got the upper third. And as you can see, this one definitely puts much more of an emphasis on the sky. This one puts much more of an emphasis on the water. And so to me, I like this one. I think this just has a lot more interest to it. But this one certainly could work, and especially it might be one of those situations where if you had a huge storm rolling in or something very interesting going on up in the sky, maybe that cropping would work differently. But I do feel like both of these have a lot more energy to them than just the static through the middle one. And so that's basically what you're looking at with rule of thirds, is trying to make sure that when we bring up that grid, you can see that the horizon line is right there on that third. Now, as a consequence, it brings this PowerPoint to right here. It'd be great if this was where we had some other little point of interest. Doesn't always work out that way, but you could, you know, fudge this line up or down a little bit if there was something maybe like a little castle or something here that you wanted to be a point of emphasis. Then you would be perfectly set up for having that right in that spot. So that's the basic concept of rule of thirds, and it really is open to interpretation whether you like this look, or maybe you just like this one better. There's not really a right or wrong answer. That's kind of the great thing and the terrible thing about art, is there's not a right or wrong answer. It just depends on what you like personally. But that kind of gives you an idea of how you would apply this theory to photography. So there you go. Kind of shows how in that example you can get more impact out of your image by using that rule of thirds. Is it going to work all the time? Unfortunately, no. But it is a good starting point, in my opinion, for learning compositional theory. And then from there, maybe you branch out to some of the other things like dynamic symmetry and work on working those into your repertoire. And then you know what you want to use for different shots, for different feelings, for different looks. And you just vary it based on what you're trying to achieve. Really, it's like anything else. It's like tools in Photoshop. There's no one right way of doing anything. It really comes down to knowing a bunch of ways to doing everything and then choosing the one that works best in each situation. At least that's my thought. If that helps, I hope you will take a second to like the video, and if you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you know when more content comes out. We've got a lot of great videos coming out over the next few weeks, and I think you're going to enjoy them. So, I will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.